It's wonderful to see so many alumni in this room, and your presence makes me think of those extraordinary individuals who attended Columbia University 100 years ago, perhaps 80 years ago, and the enormous impact that these individuals have exerted on modern Chinese society is legendary. Our distinguished keynote speaker, Mr. Zhang, and also Vice President, Professor Nicholas Dirks, already alluded to some of them. My 10 minutes would not be enough for me to even give you a one-sentence summary of some of the major figures from this group of Columbia alumni of the 20th century. But I assume many of you would be familiar with a lot of these names, so I'm going to take this opportunity to bring the name of one relatively obscure figure to light. His name is Zhang Tsun. He went by P.C. Zhang in English. He got his PhD from Columbia in 1922. I mention him because he was a cosmopolitan and Columbia-educated intellectual, a man of many talents, and he played an interesting role on the world stage. And his most important legacy lies in the very anonymity of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I wasn't able to find a clearer image of him, so you get an idea. This is now he was a playwright and also educator, distinguished educator. He was a musician and a translator of Western theater. He was a diplomat, served in Turkey and Chile, and he was the vice president of the Roosevelt Commission, responsible for drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I don't have enough time, I just wanted to draw your attention to Article 1, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. There is an ethos of universalism in this statement. Then you might ask, where does this reasoning come from? I want to just briefly say what a number of scholars have already studied this. I wanted to say that this sentence, along with the other statements from the many articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, was actually the fruit of debates and fights among the members of the committee. There were not many of them, and China was included, along with Britain, the United States, India, Brazil, Lebanon, and a number of other member countries. Now, if you look at the language, I'm highlighting conscience. You might think this might be a religious concept. It's actually not. It was a translation of a Chinese concept. The original, some of the earlier drafts included language like they are endowed with reason by God or by nature. And so the fight was really over the religious authority of this kind of argument. P.C. Zhang's role was also, as in some of the other articles, to look for a more universal ground for such reasoning. So he was the one who insisted on taking some of that language out of the articles. So that's how, by God or by nature, got left out of Article 1. Now, he insisted on adding conscience alongside reason and introduced the Confucian concept, Ren, into their debate, which was his translation of Liangxin and Ren, the ideas from Mencius. Okay. Now, the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations was presided over by the widow of President Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt. And the commission was in charge of drafting an International Bill of Human Rights in 1947, and eventually produced a text of Universal Declaration that changed the language. And this declaration was passed by the General Assembly of the United Nations on December 10th, 1948. Zhang was elected vice president at the beginning of the first session of this commission and proved to be a committed, efficient, and highly respected member of the Roosevelt Commission over the 2-year period. In fact, some people consider him difficult because he erected so many obstacles in terms of arguments that I just mentioned earlier. Religion, should it come in or not? There were some Catholic representatives who would insist on including God into the language. Now, who was P.C. Zhang? Now, he was the brother of another Columbia alumnus named P.L. Zhang, or Zhang Boling. But P.C. was 20 years younger than his brother. Zhang Boling then, this is a picture from a later time, was awarded an honorary degree, a PhD degree by Columbia University for his achievement in creating a Nankai University and his efforts in modern education. In fact, last year when the Olympics Games were being held, there was a lot of media literature commenting on Zhang Boling's role, the older brother's role, in creating this dream for Olympics, starting modern sports, curriculum in sports, in physical education. Okay? Now, PC came to Columbia University as early as 1913, when he transferred from Clark University. But then later he also worked with John Dewey and earned a PhD degree. And during much of the years, the 20s and the 30s after his graduation, he taught at Nankai University in Tianjin, principally in the theater-related subjects. He also wrote and produced Xinju, or modern, this is Nankai University. He mixed a lot in the company of theater actors and directors. For instance, this is a picture from the time when he was seriously engaged in conversation with Mei Lanfang and a visiting Soviet, very well-known Soviet avant-garde director. Then I think he created a new Chinese theater in the 30s, 20s, and 30s, and he worked in collaboration with Cao Yu, a very well-known playwright. And then he worked with Mei Lanfang closely, and also Qi Rushan, who was with Mei Lanfang, trying to reform Chinese opera. Now, here is a picture of them together. The one to your left, the far left, is P.C. Zhang. And then you go there, the man standing next to me is Qi Rushan. This is the famous actor Mei Lanfang. Last year there was a new film made by Chen Kaige on Mei Lanfang. I believe some of you have seen this, which sort of trivialized the story of Mei Lanfang. As you can see, Mei Lanfang really mixed with very, these innovators and educators. They were not just moving among musicians. One thing I wanted to bring up, which is never mentioned by people who write about Mei Lanfang, was that in the 30s he was invited to New York to perform, which was really his first trip to the United States, and then he went to the Soviet Union to introduce Chinese opera, already reformed Chinese opera, to the West. On their trip, P.C. Zhang was their interpreter. So this detail is never mentioned. So he was very active his real passion was in theater. But how come he got into diplomacy? That was because his university was bombed by the Japanese. Nankai University was destroyed by the Japanese, and then P.C. Zhang went abroad, toured a number of major capitals in the world to mobilize efforts against the Japanese in the war. And then he was then sent on to Turkey to be ambassador in Turkey, where he then got very enthusiastic about promoting understanding between the Chinese and the Arabs. And then he also spoke about the importance of recognizing historical interactions between the Chinese and the Muslim world. Okay, so he had very wide interests, really saw himself as a bridge between China and other parts of the world. I wanted to mention Gu Weijing, whose name was mentioned by both Mr. Zhang and also Professor Dirks. Gu Weijing was an earlier Columbia alumnus who became a career diplomat very early on in his career. And he, of course, the most famous role he played was being the negotiator, chief negotiator at the Paris Peace Conference, the Versailles Treaty, and he has been credited by historians for refusing to sign a treaty that would cede the province of Shandong to the Japanese. So we have all these very interesting individuals who have played a role in history, but the question is, how does that history speak to the present? In looking at P.C. Zhang, especially his involvement in the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we might reflect on what exactly happened in those intellectual exchanges. For instance, I finished with just these few remarks. During the drafting sessions of the Human Rights Commission, P.C. Zhang frequently evoked Confucius, Mencius, and Lao Tzu, but he was not embracing the so-called, what people call today, Asian values, because he was equally conversant with the Enlightenment philosophers of Europe, whom he also quoted by memory in heated debates with his colleagues about human rights. And he made many important and crucial interventions during those 2 years to prevent this Universal Declaration from being a document in which the citizens of the non-Western world would not have a voice or representation. Now, Zhang succeeded in mediating amongst the vast different intellectual traditions of the world to craft a truly universal document. Thank you very much.